The moment you say that Nathan can't do something, he'll just do this and say, what? You say I can't do it? I absolutely can.
Hello, welcome along to the latest edition of The Story of here on Pluto TV, where we have a look back at the lives and the careers of some of the biggest stars to have ever played the sport. Today, we have a look back at the career of the 2023 World Matchplay and the 2019 UK Open champion Nathan Aspinall. A story of rags to riches from a player that went on and off tour to one of the elite stars of the game. We're going to be talking about him in the company of the asset Paul Nicholson. Now, we talk about the rags to riches story in sport quite a lot, but in the case of Nathan Aspinall, he was someone that struggled with the real lows of the game, but has also enjoyed the real highs of the sport too.
Yeah, and his story is basically half written, if that. There's still so much to talk about with Nathan, but in the early days, we all knew that he was a feisty dart player, someone with a great deal of tenacity, and a style that was all his own. He's always used these Leighton Rees style darts with the front loading on them, and that hasn't changed a great deal over the course of the last 6 or 7 years. But I think the first time that people started taking Nathan seriously was when he made a World Youth Final, and he eventually lost to Max Hopp. Now, in some World Youth Finals, we find that someone is a clear favourite, and Max Hopp, with all due respect to Nathan, was a clear favourite because he was playing superbly at the time. But I think it just goes to show, when you're someone like Nathan, making a final can be the making of you. You don't necessarily have to be World Youth Champion to have a great career moving forward.
In terms of his career, perseverance is probably the key word that probably epitomises it, doesn't it? Where he went on tour, he lost his cards, he then comes back on tour. He's been suffering with other issues, injuries, comes back from that. Whatever stage Nathan's been at in his career, at some point he's had to battle some kind of adversity.
Yeah, I don't think there's been anything that's been plain sailing for Nathan. I think when he wakes up in the morning, he probably looks in the mirror and says to himself, what's the challenge today then? And maybe we can all learn something from that. No matter how down you are, you just got to find a way to dig yourself out of whatever it is. I don't know where he gets it from. Maybe it's something to do with his background, being from Greater Manchester. And we know that's a very working class type of area. Maybe that's something that he has inherited from family or friends or people around him. But if you look at the other players from that area, the likes of Daryl Fitton, Tony O'Shea, and some others, they're very tenacious players. But Nathan's taken it to another level, in our opinion, because he's someone who has gone to a Premier League final where he lost out in 2020, and he's done other things as well. But maybe the classification of his career to date is that he's just really hard to displace, and that is a great compliment.
Comes from real hotbeds in Stockport. Why is that part of the world just somewhere which just keeps producing great players? Obviously, we've seen Tony O'Shea, Daryl Fitton on the BDO side of the sport have success, and they both come from Stockport.
Well, that's a great question, because if you think about certain areas of the country, Stoke has produced some of the best dart players ever. The northeast of England, parts of Scotland, Ireland's had a great time of it over the last few years with the likes of John O'Shea, Keane Barry and Katie Sheldon, and a lot of others. But Manchester and the surrounding areas, even in southern Lancashire and parts of Merseyside, that area is so competitive. They've had a great dart scene for decades. It's part and parcel of who these people are. If you're not getting into football or rugby league, then darts is always there. You look at someone like John Bowles, for instance, from Widnes, who's not actually that far from Stockport. He was good at rugby league, and then when he couldn't do that anymore, he would decide to play darts. It's never been seen as a secondary career or vocation, but it's something that people just adore doing in that part of the world, because it's a social club culture from the last few decades, but they have been very embracing of the new academy structure as well. At Stockport College, they had a great academy well before anybody else. And they had lovely players in that academy, which I managed to visit a couple of times. So local efforts have really paid off.
So let's go back to the beginning then for Nathan. He was kind of one of the first players to burst on the scene away from what we would have traditionally seen. A player will start on the BDO circuit, whether it be youth, whether it be senior. They'll play there for a little bit, then they'll move on to the PDC. Nathan was kind of one of the first players that went through that PDC assembly line where it was development tour, youth tour as it was called initially. Then he had success there, and then he builds himself up on the Pro Tour circuit.
That's very true. You think about the original players from the start of the youth tour, as it was called then. We're talking about Joe Cullen here. We're talking about Michael Smith. We're talking about Michael van Gerwen. This is a great grounding. And the more you look into who was attending those events for the first 2 or 3 seasons, the more you understand that the talent was there. They just needed somewhere to do it. So you dig really deep. You've got Kurt Parry and James Hubbard and Jamie Lewis. There are so many. And if it wasn't for this idea to move that forward, and not just to put it in the UK as well, because some of their events went to Austria, they went to the Netherlands, they went all over the place. This was really important for the future of the sport. Rod Harrington understood this, and we're only now starting to understand just how important it was putting that in place well over 10 years ago.
As you mentioned, the World Youth final defeat. That was kind of the first time we really saw Nathan burst onto the scene against Max Hopp. As great an achievement that was, then he would play at the subsequent Grand Slam. Things then went in the wrong direction, didn't it, for a few years?
Yeah, that's fair. I think Nathan was trying to figure out how to move forward. If you're not financially secure in this sport, it can eat you up. Because the last thing you want to do is go to one of the famous blue cubicles at a Players' Championship or even a development tour event thinking, if I don't win, then maybe the rent isn't paid or the electricity bill isn't paid. It's a dangerous concept. I've spoken to many players about this in the past. Some really thrive on the jeopardy of that, but some need that security, knowing that if I miss the bull for this match to win 6-5, is it the case of, am I going to have a roof over my head? Am I going to have warmth for my kids for the next few weeks? That's something I feel that Nathan has gone through, and that pressure, it told early in his PDC career.
And there is that famous story, isn't there, that when he dropped off tour, that he had £20 left in his account. That was literally all he had left. But one thing he had was this, as we mentioned throughout the course of his career, this dogged determination. He dropped off tour. You go back to the Challenge Tour. But then very quickly, he'd get himself back up onto the Pro Tour circuit. He made the Challenge Tour really look quite easy.
Yeah, I think when we look back at this era of darts between, say, 2015 and 2025, the story of Aspinall, and I think the exact amount he had in his account was, I think it was £19.98. He needed just a few pence from his friend, I think it was Callum Luce, left-hander who's played on the tour as well. Very fine player from Stockport Academy, funnily enough. But I think he borrowed a few pence from him just so he could actually get the £20. And within a matter of, I think it was hours, he was able to bank £10,000 for beating Ryan Searle in a Players' Championship final. Everything changed. And within a year or two, he was someone who was a major champion. It's an incredible story, but in order to become a major champion, you've got to have the talent, you've got to have the tenacity, and you've got to make the most of your opportunities, and Nathan did.
What would you say Nathan's greatest qualities are?
Wow. How long have you got?
20 minutes for this, Joe.
He's got a lot of great qualities. I think the one thing that people don't give him enough credit for is just how positive he is. I've seen Nathan in the back of minibuses after Euro Tour defeats, and he has his 5 minutes like we all do, but he can turn that around fast and still put smiles on other people's faces. He's funny. Mm-hmm. He's articulate. He's not... A lot of people don't give him credit for being intelligent. He is really smart, and he's streetwise as well. So when you put him up against certain types of opponents, he can figure you out really quickly.
Then the breakthrough at the World Championship 2019, prior to the 2019 season. Those years always get confusing. He'd get through to the semifinals pretty much under the radar. There was no real expectation. He was on his debut in that competition, and he'd go all the way to the Final Four. Now, we saw Jamie Lewis a year earlier do something similar, then not back it up. And I suppose there was a feeling when Nathan did it was, is it going to be a case of just another one tournament show, or is this the precursor as to what's to come?
We always ask that question. when it comes to someone having a run like that, is this the start of something, or is this the greatest thing they'll ever do? In the case of Jamie Lewis, I think he would admit that that's the greatest thing he's ever done so far, because Jamie's not finished yet. But as far as Nathan's concerned, the tenacity that we associate with him was seen in an early round match with Gezi Price when he was, I think, 2-0 down, and then he wins the next 3 sets, and all of a sudden, maybe with a little bit of crowd participation help on his part, he started to build an early foundation for this brand that he has with the walk-on song and the way he was able to show his passion with every set win or big shot. And that semi-final run, it really did set him up financially as well, because that was 100 grand. Now, dart players don't get £100,000 for making the semi-final. People have got to be aware of that. They've got to pay a union levy to the PDPA. They've got to pay a manager. They've probably got other deductions like tax. So he might have walked away with £50,000, but that's a lot of money to solidify your family and your partner and your future for a considerable amount of time.
Now, not long after that World Championship run in 2019, would he go into the UK Open, probably a little bit under the radar as an outsider, and then he'd go on and win the tournament. Not just win the tournament, but win it in style, hitting a 170 checkout to beat Rob Cross in the final.
There's a lot made about Rob's run to being world champion shortly before that, and it was called Roy of the Rover stuff. This win for Aspinall was very similar to that. He did show form before this. He was now a winner in the PDC system and making the Final Four of the World Championship, which can give you incredible amounts of confidence. But from the early part of that year, literally 2 and a bit months later, he is going to Minehead thinking, is there any reason why I can't win this tournament? Probably not, actually. If I can go through some of the great names that I've been through in the last few months, then why not? It wasn't the greatest final. We've got to be really honest about that. But who cares? And Aspinall creating a moment at the end by hitting the 170 with his granddad in the crowd, that was a great moment for the sport. How many people, Henry, talk about the standard of that final? No one, because nobody cares. Everybody cares about the moment at the end and the fact that that was a great sporting story and a great moment for Nathan.
What's they say about not writing averages on trophies? And then after that, Nathan established himself as a key force in the game. And then he'd back up what he did in 2019, in 2020 by making the World Championship semi-final again. And suddenly there was a thought, this ain't a guy who's just having one really good season. This is somebody that's genuinely going to change and probably is going to be here for a few years to come.
Yeah, I think he was starting to find a formula that was really working week in, week out. And that's what you've got to be able to do in the PDC system. It's a grueling system. You've got to manage your time perfectly. If you've got a young family, which Nathan has, it's tough when you've got kids at home saying, where's daddy this week? And you've got to have a very understanding partner, which I believe he does. But when you're making money and you're bringing back the bread and there's a lot less pressure personally, you get the motivation to keep that going so that your career for the next 10, 15 years can yield comfort for your family and the next generation. I think that's his motivation, really. And let's face it, he enjoys the spoils of the sport because he's been all over the world. He's had great moments, but he's earned everything he's got through perseverance. Because if he didn't have that tenacity and perseverance, he wouldn't have even made it to 2019, never mind 2020.
Then he'd get to the Premier League final, he'd lose out to Glendowen in that fair, and that then felt like the beginning of another difficult spell, another difficult period in his career where you could see injuries were beginning to set him. He was beginning, just for the first time, he wasn't able to defend the semi-final man. He was just beginning to climb down the rankings a little bit. Then there was the year where he wasn't included in the Premier League, and suddenly we're thinking, is Nathan Aspinall at a bit of a crossroads here?
I think because he's so young and so talented, we were all thinking, what's next? And this is just something we talk about in sport. When someone has a great couple of years at the crease in cricket, you think this is just going to continue. They're going to continue getting centuries and, maybe get a double century when they go on tour or something like that. It doesn't work like that. There's going to be peaks and troughs. So I think when Nathan wasn't actually being talked about in the same way for a period of maybe 6 to 9 months, it's easy for the modern media to say, oh, he's on the slide. maybe he's going to drop outside the top 16. He's not as good as he was. People shouldn't say that because they have to understand just how tenacious he is. If the moment you say that Nathan can't do something, he'll just do this and say, what? You say I can't do it? I absolutely can. People backed against him in a World Matchplay one year when his opponent was more favoured, and he says, right, watch this. So we should learn from what reactions we get from Nathan Aspinall. And soon after that, even with the injuries, which looked career-threatening at the time, he would come back and do something even bigger.
He'd get to the World Grand Prix final in 2022, get to the Grand Slam. He didn't win either of those, but there were signs he was moving back in the right direction. And then his biggest day, the Matchplay 2023. And that's a title which has been won, A, by so few players because Phil Taylor dominated it for so many years. Michael's had his hands on it a few times. And the second most prestigious one, to do it in Blackpool, to do it effectively for him on home turf.
Yeah, I mean, we're now talking about putting Nathan Aspinall in the same sort of block as a Colin Lloyd and a Rod Harrington. These are greats of the game. 2 major championships for Lloyd, 2 for Harrington, 2 for a certain Nathan Aspinall with the UK Open and the Matchplay. And I think it's important as well for your legacy to have something that is so grand. To get your hands on that Phil Taylor trophy, which is only won by great players. If he doesn't become world champion, that will be the best thing he ever does, in my opinion. Just ask Rob Cross. If he hadn't have won the world championship, that would be the biggest thing he's done so far. That's how incredible it is. But the story of that match play was all about Johnny Clayton and what he was going through with his personal life and making the final. It was seen as an heroic sort of thing he was doing. But Aspinall, in the early part of that final, was inspired. You looked and you thought, oh boy, Johnny's really got a hard job today. And Nathan just wouldn't be refused the title.
And then another couple of good years after that. And there's also another thing attached with Nathan, and that's the walk-on song, the Mr. Brightside. He's kind of the epitome of the modern player that, yes, of course, you've got to have ability, and winning darts matches is ultimately going to be what picks you for certain things. But in this modern day of sport, you need to have more than just talent, don't you? You need to have that connection with the fans. You've got to have that identity. And with the walk-on, the branding, the red, he has all that, doesn't he? He gets that side of the game.
Yeah, he does. I think he's known it for a long time. I think with the benefit of his manufacturer who looks after his darts and his shirts, they've done a great job of making sure that it's recognisable. And it has been ever since they've made the shirt for him. And the choice of song was inspired, but it's all been put together very well. It's very recognisable. You speak to a casual darts fan on the street, you show them a picture of Nathan Aspinall, they know exactly who it is. But if you show them pictures of other people, they might not know. So having that brand is important for recognisability, yes, or some sort of recognition. But you've got to be able to back it up with talent. And if you look at his CV, he has. He's won in Las Vegas. And that was an incredible final with Michael Smith. He's won at the Winter Gardens. He's won in incredible places around the world. And providing that his injuries are managed and he is mentally sound and physically sound, there's no reason why more won't come his way.
What do you think is next for Nathan?
I think there's been a lot made recently of his Premier League inclusion. I think even, I'm going to hold my hand up and say that I wrote a piece saying that I wasn't sure that Gezi Price and Nathan Aspinall should be in the lineup. But the thing is, take opportunities when they come your way. And I would be laughing in my chair if Nathan has a brilliant Premier League campaign and says, well, watch this. Because this is what he does. You back against him, and then he comes back and he swings and hits one out of the park. So, yeah, don't back against him. I think constant motivation is the key for him. Whether it's financial motivation, somewhat extrinsic sort of goals with trophies and achievements, whatever it is, find the inspiration and keep moving forward.
So just finally, you were mentioning earlier on that you'd put him in a great echelon with the likes of Lloyd, the likes of Harrington. Now, this is with the greatest of respect to name, he's not yet going to be in a top 10 list. But where would you put him in terms of players that have played the game? Is he possibly on that next bracket down in terms of greatness, possibly knocking on the door?
Yeah, he's probably in bracket 3. I mean, if you're not a world champion or even a multiple world champion, you're probably not in the top 20. There's a lot of other people who knock on the door for different reasons, like James Wade, because of how much he's won and how long he's been doing it. But we've got this obsession with grading players and putting him in a chart of some sort of way. But if we had to do that, Nathan would have to be right up there with the World Matchplay win, the UK Open win, and other wins as well. But just going back to your previous question, apart from putting him probably the top 30, he's got to win on the European Tour. Once he starts doing that, he will go into another bracket.
Well, Paul, thank you very much for now. Well, a winner of the UK Open, a winner of the World Matchplay, Nathan Aspinall, one of the modern-day greats of PDC darts, a story of perseverance. And no matter whether the chips are up or the chips are down, the same attitude applying no matter what the circumstances are. Thank you for watching the latest edition of the Story of here at the MODUS Super Series. Do stay tuned to our dedicated 24-hour Pluto TV channel for more content like this.